Hey everybody, Ben Hart here. It is May 1st, 1 o'clock. Just a recording, give you an update on what's going on. Been a volatile April, lots to cover, go through today. Want to give you an update just on what's transpired, what we've seen happen, and what we likely expect to see for the next part of May. So as we started off this month, we had lots of interest around what was going to happen with Liberation Day, and we found out what happened there is we saw some volatile markets. We saw the market drop quite quickly, lots of concern with the tariffs. Lots of information came out to caused a lot of volatility into the markets. My view, I guess, coming into April is April is usually a pretty quiet month. But if you look back historically, there's been a few periods of volatility through April, even recent periods. In April last year, we had a big drop in the Dow, and April 2020 was volatile as well. If you look back, just looking through the period, April of 2000, and then the other big April was April 1951. So we've had a few events that have happened in April that have caused a lot of volatility. For us this year, we saw the VIX spike dramatically. One of the biggest increases in the VIX, which is the volatility index of the stock market. So interesting month. At one point, we were down about 20% intraday on the S&P year to date. We've rallied significantly off of those lows, up about 10% off those lows, but still on a year to date basis. As the month wrapped up, I did take a look at that. S&P is still down about 6% year to date in Canadian dollar terms. Nasdaq still down about 8, but from on a monthly basis, Nasdaq actually finished a positive. So a lot's transpired this month. And, when I started looking at the world, when we had the big correction, we had about 4 or 5, 6 trading sessions where market's down pretty hard. So we added to risk, and, that's helped right now as portfolios have bounced back quicker because we took advantage of the market correction. So before we cover anything else, just wanted to give you an update just on what has happened this month, and then we'll go into the slides, and I'll give you my thoughts and details around what we see happening from this point forward. So it is, as I mentioned, May 1st, 2025, 1 o'clock. So anything that happens after this certainly won't comment on. I'd say in Canada, the big story was the election this week. So on Monday, of course, we had the election, and we all know the outcome by now. But Prime Minister Mark Carney continues in that role. This is a pretty good view and breakdown just of how it looked across Canada. Certainly Ontario, Quebec there with significant number of seats, as you probably know. And if you look at that, a fair amount of split seats there in Canada. I'd say the biggest surprise, and I've been speaking with clients about that this week, is that Polyev lost his seat, and now the big question is, what and if does he do anything from this point? So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Whether he continues in that role or not as official opposition will be worth paying attention to. Obviously, there's some other suitors that could go into that spot, but right now, Polyev continues to look like he's going to continue in that role. It did come down to a pretty close race when you look at it. The conservatives and the liberals were very close, and the remainder of the other parties fell away quite dramatically. NDP obviously with 7 seats, and the Green Party with 1. So very tilted towards a divergence, and I think some of that has to do with what's happened with the U.S. And so because there's been such a significant amount of pressure since President Trump's got in place. I think you've seen the country, Canadians, kind of forced together and making a decision between whether they wanted Poilievre or Carney to lead against Trump. and we see how the outcome was. So I think that's why you saw quite a bit divergence with a real focus on two leaders and two parties to see how that would play out. So it'll be interesting to watch, see what happens from here. But the big question is what happens next with Polyev. Obviously, Trump was already out talking yesterday about how he's already had a conversation with Carney and he's going to have him down to the White House sometime in the next week. So we'll continue to watch that story and how it plays out and how it progresses. The other, I'd say, number of topics this week that were covered was certainly US GDP, which I'll comment on as we go through. But one of the big themes that I've been speaking about now, at least for the better part of a year, is really money supply. And money supply is defined in many ways. This is a great research chart section from our partners at ISI Evercore. It's U.S. money supply, or sorry, it's money supply for the US, Eurozone, UK, Canada, China, and Japan. And so the other way that I look at money supply is a global liquidity index, which we'll cover in another time. But this would be M2, and in the different regions, they call them different things. But this is effectively money supply in the system. And why it's relevant is money supply tends to drive liquidity, which tends to drive asset prices. And so if you look at the money supply in the US, Eurozone, Canada, and the UK, we've seen increasing money supplies, which is what I'd been referencing. And I do think that continues from this point. And that is bank credit. That is, the stop the quantitative tightening in Canada early. That's relaxed interest rates. So these are the number of ways that create and generate this increase in liquidity and money supply. I'd say the call out pieces that are standing out to me in this case, which is China and Japan. China and Japan actually haven't increased their money supply yet. And so I think that is all but a certainty at this point that I do think we see money supply coming back on in both Japan and China. China being one of the largest economies in the world, when they turn money supply back on, that would be a significant tailwind to the global economy. But so these were the interesting call outs for me this week. Japan and China haven't really increased their money supply like the West. And when they look to, I think that should be a positive for asset prices at this point. Another thing alongside with GDP would be, of course, CPI. And so CPI is your consumer price index. So this is the thing that we hear all central bankers and most economists talk about is where and what is CPI doing right now. And this has a lot to do with this worry about tariffs and trade. And so, this week we saw the US GDP at a negative print, which was, we'll say, a surprise to the system. I mean, not a huge surprise, certainly, because we would know that tariff and trade wars actually slow the economy much faster than you expect. And I've been talking about this now for a couple of months, just saying that it's likely more disinflationary than it is inflationary. And at least the data tends to line up with that at this point. So if we look at CPI in Canada, it's 2.3%, slight uptick, but generally down still. And if you look at US CPI, 2.4%. So again, heading down towards the band with which we would like to see, or the central banks would like to see inflation before they cut their interest rates. And so slow GDP, slowing inflation, these are certainly signals that the central banks are willing to cut rates based on that. And so this would be, I think, an important metric that I'd continue to pay attention to. And I think that we have more of a disinflationary backdrop than anything. So this is a great piece that I just thought around. Well, this one's directly related to ChatGPT, and this is linked to Microsoft and the use of how this is working from a perspective of the cloud services that Azure uses for Microsoft and obviously AWS for Amazon, but effectively just showing the amount of active users and really what that's going to mean for these businesses that run these clouds. And so if you're not familiar with any of the AI systems, ChatGPT, Copilot, Mistral, Grok on X, like these are all the active, we'll say, search engines that allow you to use AI to help you answer questions and make decisions. And so the pace continues to grow. And if you look, we're actually starting to see a steepening from the uses of ChatGPT. I would likely expect this to continue to steepen, and this is a good news for the companies that rely on that cloud service and that active storage of information. And the more that's out there, the better these systems get, and the more people start to use them in more detail. So as always, the opinions expressed here do not necessarily reflect those of NBF. I've prepared these based on my judgment and experience. Should you have any questions or any information, please contact me or your advisor, and happy to address them as they come. So that's it for the charts today. I'd say as we start to think about what's ahead and what do we do from this point, obviously first trading day of May here, pretty muted. The U.S. markets are off to a reasonable start. Canadians down a little bit here to start the month. Gold and oil a little bit soft in Canada, so we'll continue to watch that. And then next week, or at least first of all, I guess tomorrow we'd see U.S. non-farm payroll, so that'll be something that we're watching for tomorrow. And next week, Canadian unemployment numbers start to come out as well, and so those would be a couple of the key variables that we'd be watching at this point. I know we always talk about what are some of the things that are interesting that have come up this week. And I'd say one of the key research pieces that our firm put out this week was just a discussion around the US-China relations. And, I think this is probably the most important one to pay attention to over the back half of this year and probably over the next remainder of years. And a couple of the key things that are worth looking at, paying attention to, is just around rare earths, which is one. So rare earths would be any of the types of materials that are used in your cell phones, in your cars, and pretty much every type of device you have out there. You use rare earths. And presently, right now, China processes something in the neighborhood of 90% of those. They control 60%, but end up processing about 90% of them. So this is a major risk to the world right now, and something that I think the US is very conscious of. And that'll be an important thing to watch. The other piece, I guess, is information flow. And so, as you probably know, the world is interconnected by wires. And what's been happening over the last couple of years is as the companies have been increasing their connectivity around the world, the US has started to intervene into who can place down wires where. Is it a US company? Is it an international company? Is it a non-Chinese company? They've blocked a couple of Chinese companies from proceeding to put wires down connecting Hong Kong to Europe. And so that'll be an interesting piece to see. They all go through the South China Sea as well. So this is a disputed territory that we need to continue to think about. And so those two pieces would be something that I'd be interested in researching more and following closely, because I think that's a major linchpin for what happens between China-US relations from here. But overall, markets bounced back in April. Nice to see. Glad we added to holdings and increased the risk a little bit in April. It made a lot of sense. So portfolios have increased since then. And like we've been through a lot of volatile periods over my career, now I'd be in the position to start to think, what happens from here? Do we need to take some profits from that, or do we start to see a reacceleration in prices higher? So quite a volatile April. May's off to a good, quiet start, and there'll be lots to cover as we proceed from here. So, as always, any questions, certainly feel free to reach out to Eva or I. If you want to book a meeting to touch base or let us know any residual tax information that you're waiting for, certainly feel free to reach out to Eva or I as well. But thank you so much for joining today, and have a great rest of the week and a good weekend. Thanks, everybody.